we call ourselves the land of the free, and we all celebrate on the 4th of July, being a free country. But when you look around at all the taxes and all the regulations and all the permits for everything that you want to do, I think you can make a case that we've degraded significantly from having a culture and a legal system of more freedom. And that's where I think the true spectrum is that we're just kind of stepping increasingly towards a more heavy-handed, big government nanny state in a way.
Welcome to the Hard Way podcast with Joe Sena, founder and CEO of Spartan Races. We're teaching you how to overcome your obstacles in your life the same way we teach our 10 million plus Spartans to overcome obstacles on the course, with insight from the smartest, most accomplished experts from every corner of the world. Get ready to elevate your life today.
Joe Sena here, CEO and founder of Spartan. I've got a new friend of mine, Boyack. He's an author, a speaker, big believer in freedom and teaching, not just Americans, but anybody, how to do it the right way, right? How not to be shackled by society. Is that a fair way to say it?
I think that is a fair way, yeah.
Where'd this come from? Where'd you grow up?
So I'm from San Diego and grew up there, ended up moving to Utah later on. I grew up in a typical conservative Republican household. We didn't really talk politics too much, but I believed in freedom and the Constitution, and that's about where it stopped. But what I saw around me as I got through college and became an adult was a lot of people having problems with their own government. Their mom's farm was being taken through eminent domain, or their business was being heavily regulated. So I started to pay a lot more attention to what are the obstacles that stand in people's way of them being able to thrive, being able to achieve prosperity. And so ended up building a career in this kind of think tank world. I started a nonprofit designed to try and change laws to remove these obstacles from people. But what I found in doing that was that we would change these laws, but if the people did not understand the principles, if they didn't understand the values and the ideas, then there was really little point in changing those laws. Or maybe a couple of years later, the pendulum would swing one way, and then those laws would get overturned. So that raised in my mind the importance for these broad-based education to help people understand what are the principles of a free society. The schools aren't teaching it. Many parents aren't teaching it to their kids. They don't know how. And so that's how our Tuttle Twins series was born. And now I've become a big advocate for empowering families to talk around the dinner table about these big ideas of the day and how the world works so that they can make better sense of it and live better lives themselves.
As I listen to you, I grew up in Queens, New York. I grew up, if you ever saw the movie Goodfellas, I grew up at Ground Zero for there. And so that environment was a place where everybody was figuring out an angle, how to get around the law, how to do what they needed to do to get by or succeed. And then later I moved to Vermont. And a lot of people don't know this, but Vermont is probably very much like what you experienced. And it's overly cumbersome. There's all these crazy laws that got put in place. Act 250, you can't do any, it is absolutely bizarro land. But you're right. If my kids grew up there, they wouldn't know another way.
Yeah.
Right? They wouldn't know how this country was originally founded and what was meant to happen. Now here's a question for you. Let's use the example of Vermont. If you were able to make strides in a place that and then I think about Queens, we as humans, we tend to take advantage if there's too much freedom. You know what I mean? If I think about Queens, I think about Vermont. Vermont's way too restricted. Queens was way too loose. They were paying off cops. They were getting around laws. I built a building. You're going to love this. I built a building in Queens, New York in 1990 on the water out of ocean containers. No permits. No, didn't follow one rule. I was young. I had no money. I could it's still there today. It's a finished building still there today from 1990. That wasn't a good thing. You know what I mean? That freedom wasn't good. So how do you draw the line?
Well, I'll give you an example through a story. One of the first things that kind of woke me up to the need for making some change was there's a law called civil asset forfeiture. And the very short version of what that means is I'll share a story of a gentleman that I know. He went to the ATM. This is about 5-10 years ago. He goes to the ATM, he pulls out about $2,500, and he was going to buy a little truck that he was going to turn into a food truck business. And this was kind of the money he'd saved up working, 3 jobs, and he was trying to go launch his own little thing. Goes to the ATM, pulls the money out. He's literally driving over to make the purchase from the owner of the truck. He gets pulled over by a cop. And the officer starts questioning him and sees on the passenger seat this envelope with some cash sticking out. And the officer says, hey, what's that, cash doing there? What's that from? He explained the purpose of the cash, but the officer didn't believe him. And the officer claimed that the cash was the proceeds of a drug sale. He believed that the driver of that vehicle was the responsible party for selling these drugs. And without a scintilla of evidence whatsoever, other than his own suspicion, the officer confiscated the money. There was no criminal charges. There was no due process. In fact, later when the court proceedings began for this type of law against civil asset forfeiture, the owner of that cash was not even listed. It literally said the state of Utah, because that's where it happened, the state of Utah versus $2,500. And it treated his property as the defendant in this lawsuit, whereas he was like, this is my money. Now I can't launch my business. My American dream is screwed. So that's kind of the nexus where I find a lot of our work is like, sure, there's corrupt people. There have been throughout world history. No, look at, I think of gun control. Pass all the gun controls laws you want. You're still going to have criminals finding a way to get guns. So we can erect all these laws and all these barriers. There's still going to be bad people doing bad things. But the problem I see when you erect those barriers is that you're impeding the ability of the law-abiding good people to navigate and figure things out and move on with their life. But those people don't really know how the system works. They don't have enough money or corruption in their soul to go pay off cops. So they want to change laws the right way, but they don't know how. And so that's kind of the sweet spot where our work comes in is like, let's go find people with problems who can't help themselves. And then let's go try and help them, remove those obstacles, change the law, do whatever we need to do so that that person can go pursue their American dream.
Yeah, I guess a society left to its devices continues to put rules in place, right, to kind of put their finger in the dam for places where they're seeing stuff slip through, and it becomes overly cumbersome. But then how do you think about a place like San Francisco, where we see on YouTube folks going in and stealing $1,750 worth of goods at a CVS and not being arrested for it? How do we feel about that?
Oh, it's just insane. I mean, humans respond to incentives, right? So if you tell someone that you're going to be able to steal up to whatever it is, $999 worth of product, because as long as it's under $1,000, you won't be arrested. That creates an incentive for anyone who wants to, acquire stuff, resell it, build their own little fiefdom full of ill-gotten goods. That creates an incentive. People are going to respond to incentives. It's why the tax code is full of all kinds of tax breaks, because lawmakers want to incentivize certain behavior. Even the child tax credit, right? For every kid you have, you're getting a little tax cut, was meant literally to try and incentivize the rearing and bearing of children. So humans respond to incentives. And when you're a district attorney and you carte blanche announce that, in your jurisdiction, you're just not going to prosecute crimes under a certain level, that naturally is creating an incentive for people who desire to engage in that conduct to realize that they can do so and get off scot-free. So clearly that is a bad process, a bad decision to make, in the sense that you're just enabling people with those incentives to engage in that misconduct. The law needs to be a deterrent, right? You need to know that if you harm someone, if you steal from them, if you threaten them, if you abuse them, that there exists prosecution and a punishment awaiting you to deter that bad behavior. But if you kind of tear down these deterrents and these shackles on people, then the natural instinct, perhaps for some, to do harm to others and to try and steal in order to live more easily yourself without having to get a job and go to work, manifests itself. We need those deterrents in place to make sure that people who do harm are held accountable. And that's why you see these cities imploding that have these policies in place. I was in one of these Walgreens just a few weeks ago. They literally had 80% of their shelves totally cleared out. Everything was in the back under lock and key. They had just removed all the makeup. So they had these huge makeup displays along the wall. There wasn't any makeup at all. You had to. I was only there to buy a stick of deodorant. I was traveling and I forgot mine. I had to go ask the person at the front to walk with me 5 aisles down to the deodorant cabinet, where they would then unlock the door and get me my single, deodorant stick, and then I walked back with them to go purchase it. It's just crazy, and that's why I think incentives do matter, and we need to make sure laws are structured in a way so that the natural incentives to do harm that some have are deterred, so that we can have a more, I guess, peaceful and prosperous society.
I'm a big believer in other words, I'm against defund that whole crazy movement, defund the police. But pendulums do swing. I guess unions were a good thing at some point when workers were being pushed way too hard. But then unions become so cumbersome that they put too much pressure on the company and cost the company more than it otherwise should. So, do you look at both sides when you think about this? Do you know what I mean? Like, it could go too far one way or the other.
The country, I think, is really bogged down under this binary of left versus right. And there's this constant toxic battle between the two. Sadly, when you look at it, I think that the so-called left and the right, if you were to draw them on a Venn diagram, there's a lot of overlap of things that both the Republicans and the Democrats are doing, whether it's war or debt or, heavy regulation of businesses or whatever. Clearly, they have their differences, but they have a lot of commonalities. What I find, and I'm more libertarian, so I don't really fit into this left-right binary very well of, Republican versus Democrat. And what I found over the 12 years that we've been doing all this policy reform, we've changed at this point 130, 140 laws. What's fascinating to me about that is that the vast majority of them were completely bipartisan. That we've really tried to focus on what are some solutions that can have appeal to both sides. Going back to the story on civil asset forfeiture, we worked on a law to really clamp down on that so that people's property couldn't be taken by their own government without an suspicion of actual, evidence of actual criminal conduct. The folks on the left, the more liberal Democrat legislators that we worked with, loved our reforms. Why? Because it's people of color who were disproportionately targeted by police and civil asset forfeiture and who lack the resources to hire an attorney, and to fight back. And so they were being harmed. And so the Democrat legislators were like, hey, this is great. We got to fix this. Whereas the more conservative Republican legislators that we worked with, their perspective on it was property rights. Like, that's that person's property. Property rights are paramount and the government shouldn't intervene. So what we found ourselves doing, and what we often do, is talking about the same issue to two different audiences or more in totally different ways, in ways that resonate with their system of beliefs, their worldview. The policy is the same. They can read the same piece of legislation and see that it's only doing one thing. However, the way that we present it and interpret it for these different audiences allows us to build, I guess, some common ground across kind of different ideological, sides of the camp. And so that's where I really like to work, because I don't really have any desire to engage in all the stupid, people are burning their energy fighting one another. And I just find it so unproductive. I'd rather think of what are good solutions that can actually help people, that don't actually also harm people. Because sometimes people will say, oh, this law can really help me, but it comes at the expense of like everyone else, right? Like, tax the rich so that we can help the poor. And it creates enemies out of people. I like to say, like, what are the true win-win things that it's really just trying to tear down abusive government power to free up people, whether you're left, right, somewhere in between. We just want people in general to be free. We want families to be free. We want more entrepreneurship. We want more prosperity. And so trying to find, like, what are those ideas that can appeal to both sides? And there's a lot out there. There's, like I said, we changed a lot of laws. They just don't get a lot of attention because all the ones that get all of our attention are the crazy, toxic political battles that the media loves to report.
Let's just snap our fingers and make believe you and I could do anything. Like, in its most simplistic form, I say to myself, I think we'd all agree we just want it simpler. It's way too complex, too many laws, too many codes, too many. I mean, think about tax law and how complicated it is, and right? Like, I think we'd all agree it should be a much more simplified system. Yes?
Uh, I'll agree with you only most of the way. I don't think we would all agree with that. Here's a specific example. When there have been efforts on Capitol Hill to simplify the tax code, there's a lot of people who are like, yeah, we need this. I hate doing my taxes. But not everyone supported that. Who are the people in DC on Capitol Hill who fight arduously against efforts to simplify the tax code? It is a corporation by the name of Intuit, which is the owner of TurboTax, right? They hire a crazy number of lobbyists to fight proposals that would simplify the tax code because their business is built on a model where they thrive in that complexity. And if you reduce the tax code so that people only have to fill out a single sheet of paper and it's super easy, they go out of business. So this is what's called protectionism, when companies are trying to use the government to protect their turf. Another quick example, we fought a bill, a law that required mandatory vehicle safety inspections. Most states do not require mandatory vehicle safety inspections. Our state did. So we wanted to repeal that law because the studies show that it doesn't actually improve vehicle safety. What it does is it forces people once a year to have to pay the $20 or whatever to go down to Jiffy Lube to get their inspection. And what inevitably happens when you're at Jiffy Lube? Oh, hey, you got to fix this and you got to fix that. And here's these 18 things that I can do for you. So we run a bill to repeal this law. We're up on Capitol Hill fighting for the bill. It's doing pretty well. Who shows up to oppose the bill? Like 80 different Jiffy Lube workers in their coveralls, with Carl or whatever on the name patch. And what did they say? Of course, they're not going to go up to lawmakers and say, this is going to harm our company's, profits. And we have a whole lead generation system that requires us to capture these people that the government is sending our way. Of course not. Those aren't sympathetic arguments. Here's these guys in greased up coveralls talking to lawmakers saying, we're concerned about public safety. We're concerned that, sure, maybe at some fundamental level as a human, we're all concerned about public safety in the very generic sense. That's not why you took the day off of work, why your bosses gave you a paid, afternoon away from the car shop. You're there because your bosses said that was, important for you to preserve your business. That's the type of stuff that we don't like, because that harms people, whether they're left, right, wherever you are, when these companies are trying to use the government that way.
That's the big, like when I go back to my example, the big issue is, and I'm just like you, I'm profit motivated. Okay. But again, just like the union example, the pendulum swings too far because, like you said, then I show up on Capitol Hill and I lobby for things that are really not good for society. It's not good that we load everybody up with sugar. It's not good that we're giving everybody pills like candy. It's not good that we're like, these things are not good. So how do you balance this love for capitalism and all the great things that come with it and this insanity that's occurred with lobbyists like you're talking about? How do you balance that?
So this is such an important question. What I have found over the years is that people confuse what capitalism is. Capitalism is not what Jiffy Lube and Intuit are doing, trying to weaponize the political process to favor their business. There's a separate term for that. It's called crony capitalism. It's when you're trying to use your financial resources to tip the political scales in your favor and give yourself an unfair advantage relative to your competitors. So I want to be very clear. That's not actually capitalism. Capitalism is, the likes of Amazon and others who are massive companies with huge financial resources, but we all love same day or next day shipping. That's a model that actually serves us and helps us. We save time, we save money. It's not this decrepit monster that just is living at our expense through the political process. So how do you do that? I think that stresses the importance of limiting the government's power. When you centralize power, when you create all these laws, inevitably you're going to have well-resourced people and companies fighting over that centralization of control so that they can be the one to wield the ring of power, right? When you have a ring of power, everybody wants it. And so this is why, in the Jeffersonian model, you think of Thomas Jefferson and others, they would often talk about the need to decentralize power, that if we push power down to state and local levels, suddenly there isn't as much of a clamor and a fight over who wins the presidency. It's not always the most important election of our lifetimes, because the true power is in the individual and in the communities. And that's where power needs to reside. So that's why my more libertarian leanings, it's ultimately a fight against centralization. Like, we could get into Bitcoin and all kinds of things about the importance of decentralizing power, whether in politics or money or health. You look at big pharma, right? Even like the Pfizer and the vaccine companies, the fact that they have immunity for their products, that they face no accountability, that is a collusion of power between these large corporations and the state. Look at the military industrial complex. The reason why we're still in Ukraine, it's not really for any valid public safety purpose, but there are financial incentives where people that are profiting significant sums are incentivized to maintain these forever wars in the Middle East and now Ukraine at the expense of individuals because of the financial benefits. So we need, just like we have a separation of church and state, we need a separation of capitalism and state. We need these companies to not be able to kind of weaponize the political process as they have been. And that's when I think we'll see a lot more benefit, where these companies can stick to just serving their customers and doing good and improving the world, but not trying to weaponize government in their favor.
But as long as companies can donate to campaigns, lately, in most airports across the country, I notice in all the different shops, there's nothing but Coca-Cola products available. And so clearly they have bought the rights in all the airports to only offer their sugary obviously there's water as well, but I'm not happy about it as a consumer. As long as you're able to do that as a company, as long as you're able to secure favor, that'll never change.
Yeah. So, an example like Coke in the airports, I would look at that and say, well, if Pepsi got more innovative, then they could weasel their way back in. That's the market being the market, and that's just consumer demand. You and I need to pressure airports through protests or petitions or whatever to have more healthy options. I'm all about that. I travel a lot. I would actually really appreciate that. So we need to use the market as a way to rebalance that power and get more of what we want to see. When you get the government involved, when you get, like you said, the unions, and you get these companies trying to buy their way into power, it is tough. How do you create a firewall so that can't happen? There's various reforms out there you could do. A more humorous and not serious one is treating congressmen like NASCAR drivers, so they have to wear the logos of all the corporations that have bought their allegiance and so forth. So at a minimum, we need transparency and reporting, and we need to clearly be able to identify who is benefiting from what. But it is a big problem. And the bigger some of these companies get, the more power they amass, and the more seduced they are to go try and gain access to that political power, like Intuit, to maintain their bottom line.
You're awesome. We got to get you, whoever becomes the next president, we got to get you in there, and we got to get you in the White House working with him. It'd be great.
Well, I think Trump is a shoo-in at this point after what happened with the assassination and the debate.
Unbelievable what a day will make and what a millimeter will make. Oh my goodness.
Absolutely.
The other thing, let's talk about Trump for a second. The other interesting thing for me, I travel all over the world. We operate in 45 countries. I'm in taxi cabs, Ubers, hotel lobbies, meeting with embassies. I've yet to meet a person internationally, and maybe it's just the circles I'm in, where I ask everybody in all these countries, who do you want to win? I'm shocked. Everybody says Trump. What's interesting to me is when you talk to citizens in the U.S., even myself, for some reason, you if you didn't know what I just said, you think, gee, I wonder, he's tarnished our reputation a little bit internationally because he's got such tough talk, et cetera. But for some reason, the international community loves him. They love him.
I wonder if that has to just do with strength versus weakness. I think a lot of people see under a Biden presidency, we just look like this, effeminate, hollowed out version of a country that hates our history and hates half of our residents. And, that doesn't really engender a lot of respect among other people. You respect people who can stand their ground, even if you disagree with them. You and I probably would have a lot of disagreements, but you're a guy who believes what he believes. You have principles, you have core values. I can respect that. But if you're some flimsy, you float around with every breeze in the wind or whatever, I don't respect that. There's even a Bible verse in, I think, Revelation, where it says, I wish that you were hot or cold, but because you're lukewarm, I will spew thee out of my mouth. Right? It's like pick a side. And I can respect that. So I wonder if it's a dynamic like that. People appreciate that Trump is bold and takes a position, even if they might disagree with them. I'd rather deal with someone like that rather than this like flimsy, weak individual.
Yeah, I agree. Taking a stand is handsome. It's attractive. Some rapid fire questions. How do you feel about resiliency? How important is it?
Well, I operate in an environment focused heavily on kids. And so I think about resiliency with kids a lot. And I get really worried about our culture and the way we're raising kids and the victimization, the victimhood, the lack of accountability, lack of imagination and creativity for the future. So I think resilience is critical. And I feel like our school system and culture is not set up to help kids produce it. And a lot of parents don't really see what's going on. So super important. And I think that's an area where we're really failing the rising generation.
Another rapid fire question. Do you think the country tends to always work itself out? Like if we go too far one way, do we tend to revert to the mean?
I think the answer to that is no, because I think the left-right paradigm is completely misleading. As I said earlier, I think there's a lot of Venn diagram overlap. The model that I subscribe to is not left versus right with a course correction back to the mean. Rather, it is like maximum freedom and personal liberty and prosperity and people live and let live and being peaceful on the one hand, and on the other hand, kind of authoritarianism and tyranny and maximum oppression. I think that's the true spectrum between freedom and oppression. And in that sense, when you look at in most cases, there's certain things like obviously chattel slavery and other things that are that stand out. But for the most part, we've degraded significantly from a lot of the freedoms. You talk about building a building without permits, right? Like everyone used to do that. No one used to need a permission slip. And sure, all the buildings weren't great, but the ones that weren't, people got sued. And that's why we have insurance and private market means of dispute through civil law. But now think of something like occupational licensure. 1 in 3 individuals need a government permission slip to engage in their chosen profession. And the government makes them jump through all these hurdles and pay all these fees and do all these things. I think it's gotten out of control. And I think we call ourselves the land of the free and we all celebrate on the 4th of July, being a free country. But when you look around at all the taxes and all the regulations and all the permits for everything that you want to do, I think you can make a case that we've degraded significantly from having a culture and a legal system of more freedom. And that's where I think the true spectrum is that we're just kind of stepping increasingly towards a more heavy-handed, big government nanny state in a way.
We operate in Greece. Greece has existed for a long time. They were way ahead of the rest of the world for a long period of our history on the planet. They're a disaster. So is this just something that happens over time? We become complacent. We put in a ton of red tape and bureaucracy. That's just what humans do.
I'm reminded of that adage that, good men, strong men create good times create weak men, and so forth. And so I sense that there's a little bit of that there, that history is somewhat cyclical. America is actually surpassing all the other big empires and legal systems. The Roman Empire and others, you look, it's after about 2 centuries, and they all start completely breaking down. They overextend. They get into just debauchery and distraction and internal dissolution in their culture. They debase their monetary systems because they want to finance lavish lifestyles and foreign military adventurism. So consistently throughout history, you have these empires that only last a century or two. So to me, I don't think there's any guarantee that the American experiment survives much longer, after a few decades, if we don't have, I think, a big course correction that takes us back to some of those founding principles that were so unique. Over 200 countries have modeled their constitutions after our own. It was a landmark legal reform. It was a total anomaly compared to world history. I think it has the keys for what we can do to hopefully fix things in the future, but it requires a return to those principles rather than, I think, increasingly abandoning them.
How do people find you? You're awesome.
Thank you. So I'm at our books, the kids' books we mentioned, TuttleTwins.com. So if you've got kids or grandkids and you want to help them learn how to be free, That's at TuttleTwins.com or on social media at TuttleTwins. And then I'm at ConnorBoyack.com.
Awesome. I'm going to get the kids the book. I love the idea of having the kids learn this stuff, because if we don't teach the next generation, it just gets worse.
100%.